Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of Meet the Devs. I'm Carl Quinton, Production Director at CGA, and I will be your host on this show. With me today is Jessica Tams, the Managing Director of CGA. And we're going to start our series with a little discussion about the purpose of this little live event. And following that, we'll have there's a couple items on the news that I wanted to talk about. And so I'm going to ask Jessica, and she's going to get blindsided by it. It's going to be awesome. And then I have some interview questions for Jessica after that. So for me, I actually came up with this idea of doing this live stream because I wanted to kind of have a discussion in between the Casual Connect events. I get a lot of feedback and a lot of information during the events, but in between the shows, my crystal ball kind of goes a little darker. And so being in a small company and being that a lot of our members are in small companies, I thought that it would be useful for both you guys and us to have a live discussion and talk about what's going on in the industry and the news and then have interviews with experts in the industry, both from developers and speakers and advisors at Casual Connect to really get a feel for what's going on. So today we're starting with Jessica, as I mentioned earlier, and I think it'll be pretty interesting. So the news I wanted to talk about, Jessica's just getting to read what I wanted to talk about in the news right now. So I'm a big fan of CCP and EVE Online. So, of course, I'm going to pick news around some of my favorite personal gameplay stuff. So CCP recently announced that they're going to stop investing in VR, and they were really bullish about it. And I wanted to kind of get Jessica's thoughts first on what she thinks about their backing out of the VR space.
So, a couple of years ago when we were in Amsterdam, I did an interview for a news article, and they asked why we weren't doing more on VR and AR for our content. And I explained that I thought it was just too early for us to push this as something that people should be focusing on. It's something that is a early new adopter, should only be invested in with money for people that are pushing the hardware. We actually came out and did esports content, and I think that now in hindsight, us pushing esports rather than VR AR, it's kind of hindsight is 2020. But we had a lot of esports content. We have a lot of esports content that's coming up on our conferences, a full track on it. And you can see that there is a lot of esports stuff coming out. Both of those were hot news items. The esports kind of got drowned out, but now we're seeing UC Irvine building a stadium for esports, and I think that there's some opportunities that are there for developers, not necessarily in the places that are getting the most press.
Right. So, but as far as VR AR goes, the most penetration in the market happens to be in the mobile space.
Correct.
And kind of along the casual mobile lines. Tommy Palm, he and I had a long conversation in Seattle about the viability of VR. And for me personally, it seems like, that's kind of the space where it's going to get the most traction right now.
I agree.
And that's kind of why we've had some focus on it at the shows, is kind of along that avenue. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. So VR AR coming on a cell phone. It's easy to get into that market. Everybody has cell phones already. You just get one with VR AR capabilities. It's not expensive.
Right.
Easy to get, kind of a mass market penetration there. But actually putting on the headset, that big headset, and it's kind of heavy, and it's a very personal experience, not a family experience. It's not something that's really ready for prime time, other than in a casual format.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their own tablets, and it kind of segments them and stuff, but even more so with the VR.
With the big VR.
Right, and everybody carries their phone with them, but who carries the VR gear, or the, any of the gear hardware with you? It's not like you're going on the bus with your VR goggles, right? Even if they are mobile VR goggles, you're generally not going into that. And so, even though there is big penetration there, I think it's just not quite prime time ready.
It's not quite ready. But we are seeing some games actually in Indie Prize where they're using the phones in more of a AR situation, where you use your phone to look at some real world item.
Right.
And that actually is
Well, and Anatoly
ready.
was doing some of that stuff too,
Yep.
if you saw.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
there's lots of games that are, and there's one in Indie Prize actually at Disneyland
right, and that's kind of the
from a
difference
nomination
between
partner.
VR and AR. AR
Mhm.
seems to have a lot more traction
Mhm.
and commercial viability, in my opinion, than VR does. I mean, if you look at like HoloLenses and some of the AR stuff that's being done on the medical side and the business side,
Mhm.
that stuff seems to have like it has more of a market penetration viability than I think segmenting yourself out with VR does, because AR still leaves you connected to the rest of the world and your workplace and stuff. Right.
Yep.
Okay, so
Yeah, it's not something that I'm buying for my kids.
yeah, but you're
And
a late adopter.
I am, but when I buy a VR AR system for my children, then I think it's ready for a mass market. Let's get really into this. But until then,
Okay.
do some early cool next generation stuff with funding from one of the headset manufacturers. Other than that, you have to wait until it's commercially viable.
Right. Okay. Just checking what else. That's pretty much all I was going to touch on for the news side of things. And so I guess I wanted to get into an actual interview, being fun stuff. So the first question I was planning on asking most people is kind of give background around yourself. How did you get started in the video games industry? I mean, I know the whole story, but the rest of the world really doesn't. I mean, you were a wide-eyed, bushy-tailed physics student in the state of Washington. And then what happened from there?
So I was in the PhD program at the University of Washington, and then realized that I didn't want to go through that whole process of getting the PhD, doing the postdoc, teaching, going in academia. It wasn't something that I wanted. So I went to a job fair. It just so happened Sierra Online was there. I applied, and from there I started programming. My degrees and my focus was physics and math in school. I have a minor in computer science, but professionally I've just programmed.
So your first game was Dungeon Siege?
Gabriel Knight.
Gabriel Knights,
3.
that's right.
And
I
then,
forgot about that.
and Dungeon Siege.
And then Dungeon Siege. So you were basically in programming for the first, 4 or 5 years? And then you started getting into more of the business side of the game development
so
scene.
then Oberon Media, which some people might remember, they did the first Xbox Live Arcade launch titles. And so my studio was involved with that, as well as we did a couple of casual games early on Yahoo, MSN.
Didn't you guys rewrite the Windows Solitaire and stuff for Windows 7 or Vista or somewhere in there?
Yeah, it was Vista had new games, including the Solitaire. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And then once you rolled into the business side of things, you some of your contacts and yourself realized that there was a lack of place for you guys to get your jobs done, and that's kind of the nexus around CGA, or?
Yeah. So Rugter Peters and Eric Goossens suggested that we actually do events, and
so for those who don't know,
they were from Xylem.
Okay.
They were located in Holland, in the Netherlands, in a city called Eindhoven. And at the very first event that we did, we didn't think many people would show up. So we reserved a venue that held about 100 people. We ended up with about 300 people. The industry at the time wasn't large, and it was pretty much just an event for us and for Xylem to, in hindsight, now everybody knows, announce that they were selling the company to Real.
Right.
And so that was one of the reasons that we actually did the event in Amsterdam, is because of where
So
Xylem
that
was
was
located.
Amsterdam 2006.
2006.
So the CGA formed around 2005. 2006 Amsterdam was the first show, and it was kind of Real Xylem pushing that first show was the major one. And then after that, the next show was in Seattle, and that's when some more people started coming into the picture in the association, more publishers, more developers.
Yep.
That
And
kind of thing.
PopCap was there the first year in 2006. So it was pretty much PopCap, Xylem, and Real. And then
And then it just kind of snowballed from there.
And then just, snowballed from there. And I had a full-time job at the time, so I was never expecting this to be something that I did
So
as a
at
job.
what point was it like, okay, this is too much. I can't work this job. I got to like quit and do that. Was that Seattle?
It was right after Seattle.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I I didn't expect it to
So
happen.
then you went to Kyiv. Why'd you go
Yeah,
to
we
Kyiv?
went to Kyiv. So we went to Kyiv because Anatoly, who's
Hmm.
now the CEO of Game Insight, he's kind of famous now, and Nikita said that we needed to come to Eastern Europe. And at the time, a lot of the games in the casual game space are actually coming from Ukraine, Russia. And so we ended up going into Kyiv, not thinking it would be very big at all again. So we reserved this very small venue. It was very crowded, wildly successful, and it was a lot of fun. We had some great parties just the first year
Hmm.
in Kyiv, and then ever since then that became an event we did because it had great parties and our staff liked it. We have some Ukrainian staff and they like to go home, and so we do our Eastern Europe show just honestly because there's some great developers there, and then for us it's a fun event to have.
So you just got back from Kyiv a week ago,
Hmm.
and so it was again a pretty good party and
Pretty good party scene.
pretty good party scene.
Yep, and the food in Kyiv, for those of you who have not been, is phenomenal. And then, of course, the tours in Kyiv are great as well because they haven't been westernized, so they're not tourist heavy. They haven't been created for the average tourist from America coming over, whitewashed history. Actually, on our tour, we went to an old Ukrainian village, and one of the women who was giving the tour in Russian or in Ukrainian was speaking to one of our staff in Ukrainian, and then she said, "No, don't tell her. Don't translate that because it's something that they would never tell a tourist."
Hmm.
And so in Ukraine, you can see a lot of that still, just because it hasn't been kind of hidden and placed in a way that's palpable to
Right.
the tourist.
So back to the whole CGA Casual Connect. The other thing was Casual Connect started as a PC downloadable. These
Hmm.
guys had their users through websites and stuff, like Yahoo Games and that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
that's where most of the traction was coming from. But we always thought of mobile phones and also the handheld
Hmm.
devices.
But that was back when it was feature phones, though. I mean, when
Yep.
this started, and then
And it
like
was
a
the top
year or
10 list.
maybe two after, it was like iPhone hit the market. I think 2007-ish.
Yeah,
iPhone hit the market, and it
we
really
were
kind of changed
around.
it.
We were around and feeling pretty established before the iPhone really became something that people were doing.
Well, yeah, I mean, the iPhone hit
And
the
same with
market
the
in
Wii.
2007, but the app stores and those types of things didn't really start becoming a thing
Correct.
for like a year or so
It
after
was
that.
it was still just the top 10. So getting onto the top 10 on the feature phones
Yeah.
was still a big deal. And so when you look at the fact that people didn't think that casual games could go on to the
Mhm.
consoles, the handhelds, or onto phones was really telling at the time. And I remember getting into a fight with Alex St. John about this publicly because I thought that our users and our developers should be taking their casual games that were out on the PCs and
Mhm.
pushing them out onto the consoles. And he didn't think that they would
So
want
like
them.
Xbox Live kind of stuff, or
Well, Xbox, and then also like the Nintendo handhelds.
Mhm.
And then obviously they did because Mystery Case Files came out,
Right.
on Nintendo's platform.
Mhm.
And so it was interesting for people.
Cool. And then so smartphones came on the market, and then social became a big thing with Facebook
Yes.
games.
Which I did not actually
We-
think was going to take off as much as it did. And so I will admit that while I was right about esports, I was not right about social. So we were
Playing a little catch up there.
playing a little catch up on the social side, and we had content around it, but we didn't push it as hard as we probably should have.
Now, one of the things that I think has come up in the market that Casual Connect has done really well at has been the casino market. I think that's
Yes.
Playtika, and we have a number of sponsors in that area that have
Yeah, so-
been very supportive, that are developers of casino games, and
Yes.
that market has been very fruitful, shall we say, for
those developers.
For those developers.
Yes.
So
And it's something that the gameplay is very similar to a lot of the casual games, also with the skill games that were around, in the early days. So King.com and Game Duel were some of the early skill games companies, as well as GSN.
Right. So
which
it
is
fits
still
into
fun.
that whole free-to-play market,
Yes.
those big loops, small loops, those types of things.
Yeah.
Okay. So in in Seattle, one of the things that changing gears here a bit is the diversity stuff that we did there. So I know you feel this stuff's important, and we had a bunch of talks on it, and some really good information came out that I don't think a lot of people saw.
Yeah, I think people are interested in diversity, but I'm not sure that people really want to think about what that means. So everybody wants to say that they have women on their staff, but really what they want to do is they want to take the women, find that special woman who acts and functions just like a man and integrate them into their staff rather than taking what they they really need.
I think the problem lies in that a lot of people find the conversation uncomfortable,
Yes,
and they
I
want to
think
check
so.
the box. So they want to check the box that we care about it and everything else, and then they want to move on to doing business and getting work done.
Yeah, but I don't think that they want to talk about it
Not at
publicly.
all. Publicly, like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, I don't think they want to talk about it publicly. But it's a hard thing. So I had kids while I had a full-time job, and there's just some realities that come about with having kids. Like you're not available for some time, and your job role has to change. You can't travel as much. It's very hard to travel while you're breastfeeding. And it's something that people think, oh, I can just make a pumping room and then everything goes away. But the reality is that you get tired. It's hard to travel because of jet lag. You get mastitis. You have a baby that you have to take care of. You have to find somebody to take care of your kids when you're at home. And so if you have somebody on staff and they don't have a support network at home, then it's almost impossible for them to actually keep on doing their job as before they have kids. And I know a lot of women would like to think that they should be able to have kids and then things just go on as normal. But the reality is you have these kids and you have to take care of them. And there's no saying that you can't just put the kids on hold. You can't put the kids down for a minute. If somebody's not there to take care of your kids, then work has to wait. And there's nothing you can do about that.
Right. And then business suffers, and hopefully you stay in
Business
business long
suffers.
enough to recover from that,
Yep.
having to wait.
Yeah, and
Yep.
you just can't travel. And I would say that I traveled a lot after my kids and while I was pregnant. And it's easier when you're pregnant than
Well,
right after.
I remember when we went to Tel Aviv, and you brought, what was Ben, 3 months old? And everybody was kind of like wide-eyed and stuff, because we took him to Amsterdam, and then he went to Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
And then, we did meetings with the baby in the room. It was kind of
Yeah,
like,
but
had to do it.
you just have to do it. But it's easy when they're 3 months. But then once they start walking, so once they're 10 months old, then you can't put them in the stroller and hope that they sleep, or just hold them in your arms. But yeah, but I've taken Ben and I've breastfed him pretty much everywhere in Tel Aviv. And it's something that you just get used to.
Yeah. So that kind of brings us up to current and stuff. So what do you see for the future? I mean, Disneyland Anaheim is coming up. It's got a lot of people already signed up. I mean, like Insomniac Core Dump was something that you were crucial in bringing on. And there's PlayFab and Live Ops, and there's Disney Interactive, and there's a lot of interesting things happening that we haven't seen at previous Casual Connects that I think, that's part of the reasons I wanted to bring on the show, was to let people know about these things. Yeah.
So when we went to Disneyland, we were a little bit worried about it because it's in January. It's not the typical time that we do our USA show. And we've had to really change everything for the whole year. It's been kind of in flux for Europe and our Asia shows and our Eastern Europe shows. But Disneyland has been interesting, partially because it's in LA. And so in LA, the core gaming market is a lot stronger there than up in San Francisco or Seattle. And so we wanted to bring some more programming, some more content into the show. So we have Insomniac is doing Core Dump, which they did last year. It's pretty much a conference, a very casual conference for people who are doing hardcore programming. And then also we're returning with PlayFab's Live Ops event, which was also very popular in Seattle, because this is something that is really becoming an issue for game developers, like taking care of their live ops.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Programming
live ops
focus.
is becoming pretty crucial because, you have to maintain that IP in order to continue the revenue stream, in order to stay alive, because it's really hard now to to just reproduce another game that creates the new revenue stream. You know,
Yeah.
it's the market's changed in that way, where live ops is becoming more important to sustaining a viable company than it used to be.
Yes, that's true. And I used to be a programmer, so for me, all of this programming content is actually, it's pretty nice. It feels really comfortable, maybe more so than the design and the art content that we've typically had at Casual Connect, just because this is where I came from in the games industry, is working on core gaming products,
Right.
programming.
Right. So what would you say, in your own words, the mission of CGA is?
CGA. So when we started CGA, it was mostly because there was not a place for us in the casual gaming industry, for people making mass market games, to come together and to have a place to interchange ideas. And it's really morphed into becoming a event that is casual, not necessarily with the focus on the casual gaming market, but a more laid back event where people are open to sharing ideas and talking with each other. And with Disneyland, we've actually expanded the content a little bit to encompass a wider range of games. With Indie Prize, we've been actually having more core gaming content on Steam as well.
Right.
That's been coming in. But it's mostly around making a strong and viable gaming industry. So we're not an event company. We're here primarily for the health of the gaming industry, and that's our number one priority right now. So that's why we have things like scholarship program with Indie Prize, for example.
And the workshop with Juan on how to create a viable business in the video game industry.
Yes, and so we also have a workshop that's been launched this year
and
by Juan Grill.
Right,
Yeah.
and Juan's going to be our interviewee for tomorrow, and so we'll be going into detail on the workshop. And then Yulia is going to be in about 2 weeks, and I'm going to have her go into depth about the Indie Prize Scholarship Program and those types of things. So we won't really get into those too much.
But so the reason that we started Indie Prize was because we were seeing that there was a lot of developers who didn't quite know if their game was commercially viable. Now that when the publishers were
they were screening it, basically.
The publishers were screening it back. The publishers and the distributors were screening the games, and they were giving feedback like, you need to change this, you need to change that, and it wasn't happening anymore. And so Indie Prize was a way for us to give the developers feedback. We accept about a quarter to 15% of the games, depending on which conference it is. And then that way the developers know if their game is ready for the market. They can get feedback, they can network with the other developers. And the hope is that the developers who don't make it into the Indie Prize program will still attend. They'll be volunteers. We give them a discounted pass.
And they can kind of figure it out. Right. They learn from the indie developers that are there. And we're kind of expanding that with the indie experience.
Yes.
And so there's going to be more details to come on that later. But
from Yulia.
Yep.
And then the workshops that Juan's working with is kind of the next step with Indie Prize.
Right. After you've graduated from Indie Prize, then these workshops are what get you into.
So once your game's ready, you need to know how to actually make it.
How to create a business culture, how to structure your business, legal issues, you know, those types of things. Yeah. So I think Juan has 8 hours of content scheduled for the next Casual Connect for these workshops. And so
correct.
That'll be interesting.
And we did a test run in Kyiv, and so it'll launch in Disneyland.
Okay. Well, that pretty much wraps up my questions. So thanks for playing with me on the show. And we'll probably have you back as a co-host fairly often. But any final thoughts you want to share with people before we conclude the broadcast?
I don't know. The game industry is the best place to be. It's fun. People are passionate, and so we should really be thankful that we're able to make a living in this.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. And we'll be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific time with an interview with Juan Grill. After that, we'll be talking with Alexi, and he's creating art for the Anaheim show on Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific time. And I'll have more to come. I have about 3 weeks worth of people lined up to talk on this show. So I think it'll be really interesting. We invite you to comment on this video and leave feedback about what you want to hear, suggestions you have, and we'll address any questions you have in upcoming shows. Thank you.